The Atlanta Story is a podcast highlighting Atlanta's most interesting creators, entrepreneurs, and builders. I'm JC Cadet with Atlanta Ventures and co-producer alongside Jon Birdsong. In today's episode, Jon sits down with Victoria Lemos, founder of Archive Atlanta. Born and raised in New York, Victoria moved to Atlanta 18 years ago and since then has become a prolific podcaster through Archive Atlanta. 230 episodes later, Victoria has covered everything from the most underrated neighborhood, which we discussed, to the quirky stories and the cracks and crevices of Atlanta history rarely told. Other topics in today's interview include the 3 buildings everyone in Atlanta should visit, the best park, why she gravitates toward specific stories, how history rhymes with the past today, and much more. We hope you enjoy the show and subscribe to The Atlanta Story.
Victoria Lemos, welcome to the Atlanta Story podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
No, thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
You run Archive Atlanta, a podcast on all things Atlanta history, buildings, stories, people, and there are so many places to go. But before we start, why don't we just tell us, 5 years ago, you decided to start a podcast about the history of Atlanta and those buildings that now come alive and stories. Why'd you start?
So I always tell people I moved to Atlanta about 18 years ago, and I was kind of sad about it because I was like, I came from New York, has a little bit more history, or I thought cooler history. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, great. It's like Civil War Gone with the Wind. Mm-hmm. Yay. And I got down here and I realized like, oh, there is a lot more. Now that's all the books I was reading were Civil War Gone with the Wind, a little bit of MLK. I always joke. And so I just started going on tours. So that was my thing. I would go on them all the time.
When you moved, what neighborhood did you start in?
So I lived in Norcross.
Yeah.
Because that's where my office was. Sure. And I didn't know any better.
Don't sleep on Norcross, right? There's some good stuff there.
It was actually technically Duluth. My office was in Norcross. And then I always laugh. I was here for 2 days. My best friend drove with me. We didn't know where to go. It was New Year's Eve. So we just got on 85. Yep. And we hit Buckhead first. So
yeah, there we go.
Like, we should go out here. And that's where I spent my very first New Year's Eve in Atlanta was in Buckhead.
Nice.
We went out to, I think it was Dantana's, met some guys that paid for our whole tab, took us out to East Andrews. I mean, so
yes,
I'm definitely, it was classic. It was classic.
Buckhead.
It was
there
classic.
You go.
And so I laugh now. I'm like, oh, I know old Buckhead from 2007 or whatever.
Kind of right as the streets of Buckhead were getting built.
Yeah, it was on its way out because I have some cousins that were like, well, I went in the 90s and it was amazing. And I was like, yeah, that wasn't that kind. But no, so I moved here and then I started going on all the tours. And then at that point, the Atlanta Preservation Center was the only people that were doing tours. I went on the Auburn Avenue tour so much that I would drive the guide back to his car.
No, really?
Because it was a one-way tour and we just knew each other at this point. I'm like, oh, hop in. I had my daughter. I would put her in the carrier, take the tour. And then eventually I asked to be a volunteer. So that was a volunteer tour guide. Then I became a bicycle tour guide with Bicycle Tours of Atlanta, which was also accidental. And then all of a sudden, I think I was just subjecting my friends and family to stuff they just didn't care,
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, my husband's the tech person. He's a programmer.
People do care.
Oh, no, really. I mean, I was like, did you know? I'd be driving around let me tell you. And everyone's like, uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband, who is the computer programmer, the tech person, I joked outside, I'm 90 inside, I'm like, can I have a rotary phone? And he's like, you should do a podcast. I was like, no, I don't know anything. And I always joke, I don't know if I still know anything. I truly sat down with a person who showed me what they did. I think 7 episodes in, someone else wrote me a message and was like, oh, you should, not do it this way. And I'm sure someone's going to ask me tomorrow, hey, you should change this editing. But here we are. So I thought I would run out of ideas. Honestly, I was like, well, Atlanta history, I mean, it's going to be a year, right? 5 years later, I have not done MARTA, the Olympics, half the neighborhoods of the city, So it's we got a while to go.
Well, that's the thing is, combing through the archives of Archive Atlanta, you range from niche neighborhoods,
weird stuff,
to riots, to parks, to it's
to the 1921 overall movement. I mean, that's the stuff I'm like, did you know we had a witches club? And they're like, hey, have you done Druid Hills? I'm like, no, not yet. Witches club.
So do the time periods, do they provoke the subjects, or do the subjects provoke the time periods?
I feel so there's 3 different ways. There's like, I have a list. I mean, there's a giant list. And that's like the things I should do. But then sometimes I'm researching the thing I should do, and I'm like, what is the Witches Club? You know? And then like,
so what is the Witches Club?
Oh my God. It was related actually to a nonprofit organization that I am blanking completely. I actually sent them the research on it. But it was like a do-good girls club where they would raise money for nonprofits, but they called themselves the Witches Club, and they would dress up like witches and like spook you out of donations or just something super quirky.
And what time period was that?
I think it was like the 20s or the 30s maybe. But that's my problem is once I get on this like really cool like fallout shelters. I mean, that one, once I started, it was like 6 days later. I'm like, yeah, I got this episode. Meanwhile, Marta, it's like every week I'm like type 2 words.
Yes.
Like, okay, we'll come back.
It doesn't.
Well, it's hard. You know, like there's some topics that are so broad and so big and so important that I get kind of freaked out. And then I'm just like, I'll do that later.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then you layer on top zoning.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the zoning episode was incredible in terms of just how much zoning affects our life.
Everything today.
Yes.
I mean, we're still using the same code from 1921. And I think something I always tell people every time I talk places, like nothing is new. I have read angry pothole articles from 1850. Apparently, when you got off the train in 1850 Atlanta, there was a man-sized hole in the ground that would eat up a human. I have seen, complaints about the condition of Peachtree Street from 1890 all the way to, hey, we tried racialized zoning in, 1912 or 14 or whatever, and then we kind of coded the change of the words a little bit. We took out the racial words, and we're still using that same zoning code, which is why zoning reform is really so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And with this podcast, there's arguably few people who know the city in and out as well as you in terms of just geography. So I want to sprinkle in just some fun random questions. AKA, what's your favorite cemetery?
Oh, Greenwood Cemetery.
Yes.
All day. And very few people know about it. It is off Cascade. It is amazing for so many reasons. So it actually has a Holocaust memorial, one of the first Holocaust memorials arguably in the country. It has the remains of Holocaust victims. It has a Chinese burial section, which inspired the Chinese episode. It has a Greek Orthodox burial section with the oldest Greek Orthodox church in the state of Georgia. Several Jewish sections. It's insane. Like, and I bet you had no idea.
I did not.
Yeah.
I did not. That's
And this is my thing.
But there's also one on the kind of west side that's huge.
Westview. And that's my thing. Like Oakland, great. A lot of people know Oakland, right? Believe it or not, I think Westview is like, Westview, of course. People have no idea. Right. And it's amazing. It has a 1940s abbey that looks like it's in Italy, right? But I'm even like further.
Huge.
It's huge. It's actually the largest cemetery in the Southeast, if I got that right. Incredible history, right? Candler history, drama history. But I'm like, but no, I'm Team Greenwood all day.
And okay. So, well, I mean, we could ask a lot of these questions, and I want to keep going. So if someone got off of Hartsfield-Jackson and had to go visit 3 buildings, and you were like, we've got to go visit these 3 buildings.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's so much pressure. So this is off the cuff, but I feel like the Candler building, it's downtown. I think everyone should go to downtown Atlanta.
Next to the Hurt?
It is at, it's find like the
where the
nearest
Candler
landmark.
Hotel is.
The Candler Hotel that is the Candler building. Yes. So the Candler building again, you can talk about downtown when you're there, but you can talk about the Candlers and you can talk about Coca-Cola and you can talk about all the downtown office buildings. You can talk about architecture, material. So it's kind of like a good one-stop shop.
You get to see the Flatiron.
Yeah.
building.
It's kind of more proximity where you can talk about everything, but I think Coca-Cola is, of course, a big part of Atlanta's history, and you can talk about that because Asa Candler, of course, started the company, so you can do a lot there. Ooh, what else? Candler building. Oh, so much pressure. I think you should see Booker T. Washington High School.
Okay.
It is the first black high school in the state of Georgia. It's also just beautiful Romanesque revival, I think. I'm not an architect. Do not come at me. My friend teaches me all these. It's just so historic for so many reasons. It's also beautiful. Let's see what else.
And do those buildings, like even if you look at your Instagram, right? It's clearly you do focus on buildings, right? To help
on social media, yes.
On social media,
yes.
Excuse me. Yeah, on Instagram.
And for that reason, because buildings sometimes are hard to talk about if people can't see them, but also a house or a building might not have a long enough story. I might not be able to talk about even Booker T. Washington for more than 7 minutes. So for me with social media, it's a smaller snippet for someone to go, oh, wow, that's really pretty. Like, where is that? Oh, what's that?
Yeah, no doubt. So how do you come across the buildings? Like, do people send them to you? Are you out driving?
I'm out. So yes, is all the answers are all yes. During the pandemic, especially, I just took walks. Literally, I'd see my husband was like, "Today we're going to Decatur," and just walk an entire neighborhood, take a bunch of pictures, go home, research later. Sometimes I'm driving and I see them and I kind of like make a note. Sometimes I'm researching, come across the address, and I have a special document with those, which is like to take pictures. And I will go out on assignment. So I will go out with, 6 or 7 locations that I need to get a photo of that's more of like homework. And then, yes, people ask me about stuff all the time.
Right.
And so recently I actually I'm trying to do this like most asked about building series because everyone's like, what's that weird house on Ponce next to the Shriners? Or like, what's that?
Candler Mansion.
Exactly. Briarcliff. Yeah. So everyone, it's really actually, I love seeing how much specific houses and stuff like captivate all of Atlanta. There's a Victorian near Candler Park off that their main intersection, that everyone's like, I love that house.
Right next to...
So I'm not good with Candler, but like when you turn on Whiteford, maybe there's like a folk Victorian that sits back and it looks a little bit run down and everyone thinks it's abandoned. Turns out like an old man lives there. I've tried to email him. He wants nothing to do with me. Because I'm like, sir, I can crowdfund the renovations of this house with as many people as love it, But just, so many people send me messages. It's great. So I try to answer. So many people send me their own houses, which I do for free, and I do it as much as I can, but I'm almost like inundated with that. Like I can't keep up.
Well, and then there's the house south of the zoo, which is, I guess, one of the oldest, right? In Grant Park. I'll have to think of it.
Oh, the LP Grant house?
Yes.
Yeah. That is, so people don't realize, I think there are 4 houses that survived the Civil War in Atlanta. So that's a big deal. There is that one. There is Meadowbrook near Eastlake Country Club.
Yes.
And
Collier? Was it the Collier one?
No, it was Alston. He's the guy that got murdered by his friend. I did an episode about it because it's a wild story. That was his house. And then there's 2 in the Cascade area, Willis Mill Road and another road that's not coming to me.
4.
There's 4. Yeah. That could, I'm pretty positive it's 4. Yeah. But see, that's a while, right? Like people don't realize that. Because Civil War was extremely destructive, not just from Sherman. Like we blew up and destroyed a lot of stuff as well. So for something to survive the war was a really big deal.
But then you also dive into trends like, you'll dive into the mid-century modern, you'll dive into...
Yeah, I love, Oh, I have a 64 ranch, so it's like, I love mid-century stuff. And there's some great mid-century in Atlanta. Collier Heights, that's like, it's amazing. Yeah.
Is there one that sticks out?
Oh, gosh. Oh, that's a...
And I still want to get to the third building.
There, I know. It's like
I'm just
panic.
giving you time.
I'm like panic thinking, no. So it's funny. Collier Heights is amazing. There is an Asian-inspired, like pagoda style, they call it in Collier Heights. That's really like kind of famous. There's a roundhouse there. But then I've recently gotten into like near West End, Westview. There's these 50s houses that are like a little bit more subdued in the mid-century style, but it's all black contractors, developers, architects, and they're like 50, 51. That's been my recent like Chickamauga Heights, that's what it's called. That's been like my laser focus lately is like figuring out all those houses.
Dang.
Yeah. There's just, and Sherwood Forest, like there's just a lot of good mid-century.
And I also feel like a lot of them are either getting completely renovated / gutted or...
Can you see my eyes rolling? Yeah, no.
or just getting torn down.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's America, you know. I don't think we'll ever be able to tell someone like what not to do. Now, we do have protected neighborhoods. Collier Heights is protected, which is great. That's a whole other discussion, right? Because what's protected, what's not, usually along racial lines or economic lines. But yeah, my thing is like, if you don't want to live in a mid-century ranch, don't buy it.
Right.
You know, like why would you buy a mid-century ranch and then try to make it look like a farmhouse? That's the stuff I don't get. You know, that's just me though. I don't know. I don't know. I'm very much into like, hopefully you chose your neighborhood, right? You want to, I don't know, like you want to kind of go there to honor the history. And I guess that's part of maybe why I'm doing what I'm doing, because Atlanta is changing so fast. People are moving into neighborhoods that they have no idea. A lot of these people are white and they're moving into historically black neighborhoods. And it's like, hey guys, stop for 2 seconds and maybe even learn like why your neighborhood is called what it is. You know, what's the history about it? What are the stories? And then you're not like that clueless gentrifier. I don't know, lofty goals, right? But maybe we can all be a little better, like with a little bit more information.
Right. Are you seeing any trends on that in terms of, I mean, besides, what we see on Twitter and, I'm buddies with King Williams.
I love King. Honestly, I go to him for those questions. I always joke, like, I don't know how to solve our current problems. I'm here to, like, give you the information about the past. And I do look to King for a lot of gentrification stuff. I don't know the answer to it. My hope is, again, it's America, it's capitalism. You're going to live where you're going to live. Yep. I just don't think we can control that. But at least come in informed and respectful and, understanding who lived there, who might still be living there, how you can help a person continue to live there, or even talking to neighbors. Like, I'm really big on oral histories recently, especially. And I tell people all the time, like, every neighborhood should have a podcast. Like, if you live in Cabbagetown, I will help you. And I mean, I know some neighborhoods do some stuff better than others or a little more detailed, but it's like, go talk to all your neighbors.
All the neighbors.
Record their stories. If there's an old lady that lives on the corner, go ask her, because that all leaves when those people are gone.
So the archives that really draw you are the ones that are in the crevices, in the cracks.
Yeah, totally.
The ones that aren't, they may or may not have a Wikipedia page. Who knows? Versus, and I get the MARTA,
MARTA's important. We got to talk about it. But it's like, how do I even start that,
It's like, I've had a blog post that's been 6,000 words and that's been sitting in my draft and I just can't press.
Yeah.
I just can't press.
I feel you.
I can't yet.
Yeah.
But what are the things that, what crevice and cracks do you like gravitate towards where you'll stay up till 2 a.m. studying and I mean, what stories from whether it's buildings or the witches brew, the witches club. How I want to dive into your style and taste, because clearly, it's something that gravitates other people.
Yeah, I always say like I'll do anything for women's history. And I'm just always interested in like people doing things in a time when they weren't supposed to, or it was difficult for them. So it doesn't have to be women, but it's like, I'm always pulled in by this story of like, again, people getting things done or doing things when someone told them they shouldn't be working or they shouldn't be voting or they shouldn't be existing, So like, that tends to be a lot of women's history, tends to be Black history in Atlanta. And that is just so exciting to me, especially women's history stuff. And there's so many small stories. And I say small because we're not writing about that, right? Like early papers are just, we're definitely not writing about anybody that's not white in the white newspaper. And women, this is my joke about women's history in Atlanta. It's like every woman is Mrs. John Smith, and the efforts that I have to do to get this lady's first name is usually finding their gravesite, which is so wild. So yeah, that is always intriguing to me. I'm very fascinated by like psychology in a way. So the Cold, believe it or not, I'm always like, I hate war stuff. But the fallout shelter stuff led me to the Cold War, which was so fascinating.
Can you just give us a quick primer on the fallout shelters?
Yeah, well, so I don't even know how I got into this. I think, it was my friend Emmett. He asked me about it, and I was like, yeah, let me look it up. And then I realized that Atlanta, obviously during the Cold War, built fallout shelters, but that was very political, right? It was actually the president would say, it is un-American to have community shelters. Like the very, you should take care of your own, like you should build your own fallout shelter. But of course, like nobody could afford it. It stretched into different neighborhoods. Like East Point had the first community shelter. The radio station WSB, they had the first almost like company-wide fallout shelter. There are fallout shelters still existing in people's homes today. Somebody wrote me an email.
Like deep?
Underground. Somebody wrote me a message that lives in Morningside. And truly, it is like a time warp. Like, it's exactly as it was. And she's like, you should come see it. I have not seen it yet. But so some were covered up.
Canned foods and...
It came with, the pamphlets. Like it was because they'd sell you kits. So it was just so complex. And then there was a lot of national discussion of well, what do you do in an inner city? You know what I mean? So what do you do if you live in an apartment and you don't have a fallout? And they were just kind of we don't know. So... just so much. And in Atlanta, the section of Midtown, which is really just the heart of Midtown now, those were federal buildings. And so they would do these mock drills where they would empty out the entire building and put them on a bus and bring them up north on Peachtree Street. So it touched every part of Atlanta. And then there's just the psychology of the Cold War and, the bomb. Yes. And I was like, this is so fascinating. So yeah, those are the tangents I go on, kind of psychology and or the people that are breaking barriers for their days.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow. The what is the park that someone should go to that they just haven't explored?
Oh, well, okay, because there's the classics, there's Piedmont Park, whatever.
Yeah.
I think that everybody should go to... It has now been renamed Bagley Park here in Buckhead. So it was Frankie Allen Park for a very long time. It's the home of Buckhead baseball. So many people have probably been there, but if you don't have kids that play baseball in the area, probably not. And the reason it's such a big deal is because I tell people this all the time. If you're enjoying park space in Atlanta, take a second because somebody probably lived there. They were probably black and they were probably removed from their homes so that you can have a park. And that story is so classic with Bagley Park. It was a black neighborhood with tax-paying Atlantans that they did not put sewers in or running water or whatever. And when they built Garden Hills around it, white neighbors were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? This is a sanitary concern. This is a slum. And so they eminent domained everybody out of there. And then Fulton County magically found $500,000 to build a park.
What year was this?
By the time they built the park, it was the early 50s. It was like the 40s when they removed them. And then they started playing baseball there. It got renamed a few times. So it's been renamed recently to honor the residents there. I'm blanking on his first name, but Mr. Bagley was one of the big residents there. So it's been renamed to honor him to kind of correct this history.
Right.
But it's one of those things where I've been there many times with people showing them for that reason, and you just see thousands of kids playing baseball, and I look in the distance and be like, do they know any of this? So that's my thing. It's it's a park, and it's beautiful, and you can enjoy it, but it's a place to also say, okay, there's a deeper story here.
I've passed it hundreds of times, thousands of times.
Now you know. I'll send you the plat map. I think it was platted in 1912. And basically, you know how you kind of drive down that main drive where there's the picnic areas? Mm-hmm. That was the main drive of the neighborhood. The houses were all along the sides.
Let's talk about skylines and skyscrapers because you go into them, but not that much.
Yeah, it's one of those things like
the early 1990s don't really get you.
Yeah, I love those postmodernism thing. I mean, Buckhead, you're like, this is so ugly. No. Like I said, I don't know if the skyscrapers have their own episodes, which is maybe why I more post about them. But they're all important, especially downtown. I always joke every famous guy from Atlanta's history had a building. Joel Hurt had a building. Candler had a building. I'm blanking on the other guys, but they all had buildings.
Yeah, Healy.
That's what I say. They all had buildings, and they were all played a big part.
And the mayors cared about the skyline and
totally, and the height. I mean, I would say Atlanta's been competing since post-Civil War, so we're like, we got the highest, we got the first, so everything.
We've got the airport.
Yes, so it's all about what do we have and what's bigger and what's better, and we're doing that now, right? Yeah. I mean, we're still trying to build the biggest or the whatever. But yeah, so it's like I said, that was one of those things. I was like, it's not really an episode; it's more like a post.
Yeah, and how far will you go out from the city?
My rule is 285.
Okay.
And only because I have to make a rule because everyone, can you do Alpharetta? And I'm like, you should do Alpharetta. You know, I'm only one person. I can't go to all the places. I will say I will do Stone Mountain one day. I actually want to do it with King because it's important and it breaks the rules. But
the Atlanta history documentary on that was...
Yes. That's what there's a lot out there already. But what I'm learning too is like what I think is an old story and everybody knows about it. I realize that that's not true. And sometimes I have to remind myself to do those topics that I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, there's a 700-page book about that. Why would I talk? Who am I to talk about? Like Leo Frank. I really did feel that way. I was like, who am I to talk about this? You know, there's been an extensive book on it and it's been so researched. And then someone goes to me, wow, I had no idea until I listened to your episode. I was like, really? I'm like, oh, okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, because there's the books... probably 700 pages.
That's the thing. And that's why I always call myself a middleman. You know, it's like I will read the 700-page book about Leo Frank. It's fascinating to me. It's important to me. You may be marginally interested, and that doesn't mean you're not. You just don't have the time or that kind of commitment. And so if I can spend 15 minutes just telling you the basics, I feel that information makes you a better person, like a better person in how you interact with Atlanta, how you understand things, especially Stone Mountain. If we're talking about Leo Frank, you know, Stone Mountain and our anti-Semitism and all that. And it's like, okay, cool. Like I gave you the 15-minute version, you know?
Yeah, the Stone Mountain documentary, it was still wild to think that it was delayed, you know, and then it came about in like the 60s.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. Yeah. They started that carving in the 20s or something, and then they finished it very recently. Yeah.
Which you don't get that in the...
No. And, you know, that the KKK reformed on top of the mountain. It's like, that's a big thing, you know, and we're part of that. Atlanta's part of it. Stone Mountain's part of it, so...
Yeah. So anything inside 285, you're...
Yes, that's my rule. So that's my rule.
So you could do Fulton County Stadium, but no Truist.
Oh, God, no. Yeah. And I mean, it's funny, though, because obviously there are parts of DeKalb County inside 285. But this is my hot take. Everyone says, like, ITP, OTP is, like, the big divide. I think it's East Side, West Side. Like, when you put me on the east side of Atlanta, or God forbid in DeKalb County, I have no idea what's going on. I mean, you take my phone, I wouldn't know how to get home. And it's so funny because my husband grew up in DeKalb. So he's like, this is my high school, this is whatever. Right. And I'm like, where are we?
So
Moreland is the, yeah. And I mean, not that bad. Like I go to East Atlanta, but it's like once I'm getting out there, I'm so unfamiliar. It's not where I hang out. It's not where so I tend to like avoid it because I don't want to do an episode about a place unless I have been there.
Sure.
And so that's my thing. It's like, but I'll make an effort. I'll go to Avondale Estates, let's say. Mm-hmm. I had really never been there until I did that episode, and I purposely went for... Which was
like the German, or the...
It was... Avondale Estates is really fascinating. It has some history, but I had...
The first Waffle House?
Yes, but I had biked through it first and then walked through it. And then I was like, okay, I have a basic understanding. Now let me do the history. And then for me, that's how I feel. I can't talk about something if, I want to be able to be like, yeah, the red house on the corner with the funny mailbox, you know.
What's the most underrated neighborhood?
Oh, I just told someone this other day, Cascade Heights.
Yeah.
Cascade Heights, 100%. And it's so fascinating to me because it was built at the same time as Morningside. Same timeline, same style of houses, same architects. They're both white neighborhoods.
Right.
And it's so interesting to see how the white flight affected Cascade Heights. It becomes this very prominent black neighborhood in the 70s and 80s. And I don't know if you've been over, like the lots are amazing. Adams Park is amazing. The houses are amazing. And I swear everyone lives there's like, shh. And I'm like,
should we cut this out?
If I had some extra money, I would be buying a house in Cascade Heights. So Adams Park, Cascade Heights.
I just remember a lot of mayors have lived.
Oh, and so the mayor's house was there during Maynard Jackson's actual mayoral term. But yeah, he lived his other house when you get off Cascade and you pass the Kroger.
Yeah.
Oh, the Pascals lived there.
Yep.
I mean, our mayor right now lives over there, So like it is definitely like Atlanta's best kept secret. Again, maybe secret for white people. Like
right.
Atlanta's black people already know about it, and it's awesome over there.
Yeah, there's a driving range, the Cascade driving
the golf
range.
course there, and that's actually historically, Alfred Tupp is the first guy that desegregated Atlanta's golf courses, and Greenwood Cemetery is over there. So if you find me in 5 years, I'll be living in Cascade.
What about the most overrated?
Oh my God. I don't want to be that person, but I just hate Buckhead so much. It's just, what happens with Buckhead neighborhoods is they're hard to explore. There's no sidewalks on purpose, right? Because they don't want you walking by their big houses. It just doesn't have a welcoming feel to the like casual explorer, Sure. And I'm talking more, I think the Paces Ferry and the West Paces Ferry, where like there's some history and there's beautiful houses. And I used to have to, when I worked up the street, go for a run and risk my life, like go for a run and not get hit by cars so I could get to some of these houses I wanted to see. I just feel like it's almost gated without being gated, which is what they're going for,
I've not listened to the Governor's Mansion episode, but I have been to the Governor's Mansion, and I think that there's a lot of areas of opportunity to improve the
welcomingness of it.
Yeah, just like the homeliness.
Yeah. It's and funny. Well, if you we had 4 or 5 of them, but before they moved to Buckhead, it was in Ansley Park. But then if you really think about it, Ansley Park kind of was the Buckhead of that time,
right.
And that's what we've been. Peachtree Street's so fascinating. It's what we've been doing, which is moving up and out of Atlanta proper. As we get more wealth and cars became popular, we just kept moving on up. And jokingly, we're still moving on up.
Totally.
Now we're like going to Woodstock. So it's funny
Ball
to
ground.
see. Yeah, it's
Ball
funny to
ground.
see how that's happening.
Yeah. And that was the Ansley Park. That was after Inman Park.
Totally. And that's
Right.
the thing.
I mean, those
Inman
houses
Park
at
is
Inman
the
Park-
suburbs,
Yes.
which I love telling people. I'm like, well, we're standing in Inman Park, and this was far away from Atlanta. It was so far that Joel Hurd had to put an electric streetcar to get people to buy there. And then, like you said, then we get cars, and Ansley Park is like, well, you could just drive your vehicle all the way up Peachtree,
And then Eastlake was the country.
Yeah. Oh, people, I interviewed someone or talked to somebody who would literally summer, in Eastlake, which is wild.
So are there people that are 80, 90, 100 that you are trying to get in front of to talk about the history of whether it's Atlanta or their neighborhood? I mean, is that part of your research?
I joke, one day I will win the lottery and I will quit my job and I will interview all the old people. Right now, it's such a time commitment, so it happens more accidentally.
Yes, you do have a full-time job.
I have a full-time job, and I always tell people, I have a full-time job, I have kids, all the stuff, and because everyone's like, how do you do this? I was like, if it's not evident, I'm very passionate about it.
But the weekends must be so fun with the family. I mean, you're going everywhere.
I swear to God, my calendar just says like podcast sometimes. He's like, okay, bye, see you later.
I thought I was
drag
adventurous going to like the Chattahoochee this weekend.
Yeah, no, there's no downtime. Everything, I always laughed because people are like, how do you do it? I'm like, well, I combine things. Like I will go for a run and do it where I'm supposed to go take a picture of something so that I can like kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm a multitasker. So far I've done 3 oral history interviews. They have all been very just kind of someone bringing it up to me. Really sadly is... So it's kind of 4 interviews. 2 of those people have passed away already. They're all in their 90s. And that's really driven home to me like, wow, somebody needs to record this. And I'll tell you this story. It really gives me tingles every time I talk about it. So I interviewed Wesley Johnson. He's an episode. He's 90. He's a black man. He went to Booker T. Washington, in the Army, talking. So his wife, she's the one that just passed. His wife's in the kitchen the whole time, just kind of ignoring us. And then she sort of pops her head in, and I was like, come on in. And we're asking questions about how they met. She's telling the real story of how they met. And she sat and she told me about the fire. So the Weinkauf Hotel caught fire in 1948
Was
or
that
40s.
downtown?
Downtown, which is
Yes.
today it's the Ellis. Very famous fire. So,
Yes.
it was a white hotel. I've talked to a lot of people who have some stories. Oh, my uncle was in the fire. Oh, whatever. I had always heard stories, but from other white people. So this is a black woman telling me about this. She goes, oh, I remember that day. She goes, my grandmother, she woke us all up in the middle of the night. She shook us all awake. And she said, the hotel's on fire. And I'm like, why? She goes, oh, well, 2 months before they had lynched those two couples in Walton County. And her grandma thought it was like divine retribution.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. So
2 months earlier in 1948.
2 months earlier in 48 or 46 in Walton County, two black couples were lynched. That's also a famous case. And so this is me, thinking, how does a hotel fire, impact a black child? You know what I mean? That is how her grandmother interpreted the event and woke her entire family up to tell them and then let them all go back to sleep. And that's when I realized, I was like, oh, I'm reading facts and this is so much more than I'm even aware, and I won't know this and no one will know this unless they talk to people like this.
Right.
That's why I am like a proponent. I'm like, record all the people.
It's that's someone that's, they're not an Andy Young.
She's a very, prominent person in her community, but not a famous person, and she just passed away. And a couple other people just talking about, life. One woman grew up in East Atlanta, which is now really the center of all the bars. She grew up on a dairy farm. She talks about how going to downtown Atlanta was like going to the big city.
Yeah.
So,
Macy's building.
For people that live, let's say in East Atlanta now, that can't even fathom that, it's like you're not going to know that until you talk to that lady.
This podcast is brought to you by Atlanta Ventures. Check out our website to access many resources, including free tools and guides to start a business, a calendar of our upcoming events hosted at Atlanta Tech Village, and a lot more content around building companies. My wife and I, we lived in Briar Hills, kind of across from Fox 5 for years, and our neighbors were 101 and 94.
Wow.
And they were the second family that moved into the neighborhood in 1952.
That's amazing.
And they, the husband passed, which was tough to kind of observe and be part of that experience, but she's still there. But yeah, it was. So
she's still alive?
She's still alive.
I need to record her.
You
see?
do.
Sorry.
You do. She's amazing. And it was a Jewish community that lived in Summer Hill, and then the
highway took away their neighborhood. Yeah.
So they moved to.
Yeah, Briar Park Court. I did an episode about with Caitlin Mee, because that was a Jewish architect that actually played a big role in saving lives in the Holocaust, and it's like 8 houses. When I went in there to take a picture, the neighbors were like, who are you?
Yeah.
Because it's such a tiny little isolated community.
Will you dive into Olmsted? And because I feel like that's a bigger story.
Well,
that crevice might be too big. I don't know.
No, it's actually not as. This is so funny you're saying this, because I'm working on a Druid Hills episode finally. And I can't take credit. My friend Liz kind of told me this. I joke, Olmsted is like our George Washington. You know how in the Northeast, everyone's like, yeah, George Washington slept here, on his way through, and is that true? Probably not. We do that with Olmsted all over. And the only thing that Olmsted, the senior, really designed is the Olmsted linear parks.
Over by off of
So
East
off Ponce,
yeah.
the Springville and all those are his true designs. What happened with Druid Hills, and it's a little complicated to explain quickly, but basically Druid Hills was a little dramatic, where Joel Hurt had this plan. He had talked to Olmsted. Olmsted had some designs. There was financial issues. There was investor issues. The development of the neighborhood was delayed. By that point, Senior was in a mental institution.
Yeah.
And it was his sons that kind of picked his design back up. But at the end of the day, Hurt actually had to sell the Kirkwood Land Company kind of at a loss. That's a whole other story. The developers didn't really honor his vision. So Druid Hills, the neighborhood, is not at all what Olmsted said it should be. Olmsted felt very strongly about it should all be planned out first, and that's just not the way it went. But that corridor along Ponce, 100% Olmsted Senior. But again, even Piedmont Park, like the Olmsted brothers, again, it was his son and stepson, they had did like the 1909 plan. You know, those are details, but everyone kind of throws around that Olmsted name.
Yes.
Like, it's our George Washington. That's what I say.
Because he's did all the other things too.
Yeah, he's fancy. Atlanta wants to be fancy. Let's be honest. I always say Atlanta has a lot of like the redheaded stepchild thing. So they're like, oh, Olmsted designed Central Park. Well, he did our blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
And it's like, I don't know if that's exactly
What are some other good examples of that? Because I get that sense.
Oh, I tell people all the time. Because a lot of people are like, well, why do we tear things down and whatever? And I was like, what you have to get about Atlanta is that from the second the Civil War ends, not even then, like we start off as a railroad outpost, right? We're a rough and tumble, think Wild West, not Southern. Everyone's like, oh, Gone with the Wind plantations. It's like, no. Lots of men, gambling, cockfighting, no women. Like that's 1840 Atlanta, right? Then we have the war, and the war ends, and mostly attributed to Henry Grady, starts that New South movement. And that's all about like, bring your business here. Please bring your business here.
Exposition.
All of that. Like it's all about like, everything's fine, that slavery thing, we've forgotten about that. We have this totally great labor force. They're super compliant, no unions, yay! Like and we've just done that forever. And not to get into too much current stuff, but it's like all the tax breaks we give now, it's like we don't feel like we're worth it.
Right.
Like it's like we still feel like it's 1867 Atlanta and we have to convince people to come here. And it's like, I don't know. I think we've progressed, right? Like I don't know if we need to be begging companies, and really who suffers? Our schools when we do these tax breaks, right? Like to get people to come here. Like I think people want to come here. But anyway, so I would say like our DNA is marketing. I have found some hilarious stuff from Chamber of Commerce from the 1870s where they were like sending out pamphlets about like come to Atlanta.
Our DNA is marketing.
I know. I mean, our DNA is marketing. The Forward Atlanta campaign started in the 20s. It's basically, we still do it today. It's how we got the World Cup even, So our DNA is marketing. Marketing means new, shiny, and exciting. We don't want to talk about old things. Old things remind us of the past, Like we just want to talk about what is new and shiny and exciting. And that's like why we are where we are. And once you get that, you're not mad about a lot.
Right.
And at the very least, maybe you can do something differently. But that's just how we are.
How do you as a historian navigate the changing of Grady High to Midtown, right?
Yeah. I say this. I truly believe that the people who have stake in that place are allowed to do whatever they want. So similar to Brown Middle changed to Herman J. Russell Academy, but similar to Grady and Midtown. My take is like, it's not my opinion. I'm not a student there. I'm not a teacher there. I really do believe that they can decide. I do also say this. There are so many terrible men in Atlanta's history that just people don't know about. So what I kind of see happening is like people take a soundbite and they don't know exactly, and they kind of run with it. And I'm like, let me tell you about James English. Like, let me tell you about Joel Hurt. Because if you want to talk about a real terrible person, it's like, I can show you some stuff. So again, on one hand, don't care what you do. Like, go ahead, change the name of your institution or whatever. But also, let me give you some more names.
Who are some of your contemporaries that you like? I mean, I love the Lance Russell, who does the stories of
those are
the minute long.
Yeah, they're not even. They're like, sometimes I'm like, I want more.
Like the other day, I was driving through downtown. And I was like, why is Marietta Street so wide that they put the big statue? Where the
5 points.
Yeah,
there was a well, points. The artisan well.
Yeah, and it's like, and then I watched stories of Atlanta, and it was because the road needed to be this wide to get. I think it was like the timber from northwest Georgia for one of the,
expositions or something.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I said this earlier, like everyone has a role, right? So he does the short YouTube videos really, and that's it. I don't have TikTok. I barely do a video if you paid me, that's not my strong suit. So what I've seen recently and love recently is Anecdotal ATL, who I've met him. He's super nice.
I've got to look at that.
Oh, it's so great. You have to look at it. Yeah. His name's Will, I think. We met at trivia. But everyone always sends it to me. They're like, do you know him, whatever. But it's great because they're well-produced, short videos with good history for the people that will watch TikTok, don't want to read, don't want to listen to a podcast, you know? And so what I'm having is a lot of overlap almost, where someone's sending me the video about Ponce de Leon Springs, and I'm like, I did an episode, you know? So hey, my thing, like, you cannot reach all the people with all the things.
Yep.
Like, we all should be doing. And I'm just in general, I'm so big on inspiring people to do whatever they think they should do, like, because I think we all kind of have some weird niche hobby, whatever. It's like, I knit pot holders, and you're like, this is so silly, but no, like, follow it, and you just never know where it could take you.
Okay, so I've got a very random question. Driving up Peachtree, when the Chick-fil-A was demolished a couple months ago.
That house behind
There's that pink house.
Yep. See, that's another one.
What is that?
The only reason I've not posted about that is because you want to talk about a hard house to photograph. Like, I got to park my car somewhere and walk out.
How do you even get there? Do you drive into...
It's funny because I used to work at Peachtree and 25th, and so I'd go to that Chick-fil-A.
Yes.
And when I would pull in, that's how I started seeing it. I was like, what is this building? So here is my, there is a guy named Dan Morrison, if you want to talk about contemporaries. And again, such a weird niche. So he doesn't have any account. He has a Flickr page, and he comments on all my Facebook posts. That's all I know. I've never met him in real life.
Way to go, Dan.
He's
I love
incredible.
Yeah.
He has a collection of historic photos.
Comment marketing. That's what we say.
Oh, is that what it's called? I mean, truly, it's every post. And he always like supplements my posts with extra stuff. So I love him. He pointed this out to me. I did an episode about the last mansions of Peachtree, and I said there was 5.5. And I say half because one of them was moved. And he pointed out that really should be a contender as well. It's the Du Bois house or Du Bois mansion. So it's like Dubose. He has a whole Flickr page. So I will send that to you. And one day when I get my butt over there to get a photo, I'll post about it. But yeah, it was just like all the other Rufus Rose house, the castle. It was just a mansion on Peachtree. And then it just got boxed in.
Are you saying the castle on 15th Street?
The castle was a mansion. It was someone's house. So the castle, the Rufus Rose. Now I'm blanking on my own mansions that I talked. Oh, the Rhodes Hall.
Yeah, Rhodes Hall.
A lot of them are being repurposed, of course. Yeah. But no, that's like a office build. Like, there's offices in there. It's just once they put that, you could tell it's like a 50s kind of retail in the front. It's like no one ever saw it again. I had so many people sending me like car photos. They're like, "What is this house?"
of the
pink house,
right?
Yeah, I'm telling you.
Because once the Chick-fil-A got leveled, then all of a sudden it's very prominent. You're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Like,
see, I haven't always seen it,
that?
But like other people, trust. I'm telling you, there's some photos where it's like work. I'm like, okay, where can I park the car? Then I have to cross Peachtree. Then I have to get
So the third building. So the first one was Candler.
Yeah, the Candler building, Booker T. Washington High School.
Booker T. Washington.
Oh, I feel like I gotta go Midtown. Let's see. So, this is hard. I feel like I could have prepped for this.
I didn't send you anything.
I know. I'm like, there's no prep at all. I'm winging it. This is going to be very random. Okay. But I have a soft spot for the old Eagle building. So on Ponce, across from the Krispy Kreme that burned like 3 times at this point.
Next to the Kodak.
And I did an episode about it with Charlie because that and the Kodak. So for lots of reasons. And because Ponce was also very residential. So what people don't realize is that the Kodak and the Eagle are built on houses. The Kodak is built onto a 1905 Italianate, and the Eagle was built into like an 1890s house. So you have this like transition of Ponce story where they started slapping like 40s and 50s retail on the front. And then it's like the center of Atlanta's gay history with the raid and the Red Dog stuff. And so that's why it's, again, I specifically did an episode with Charlie about it, but I think that maybe will start to kind of kick off the LGBTQ history of Midtown. So there's a lot. I always pick a place, if you can't know, that like can talk about all the things.
Yes.
And that's like the tour guide in me, because you can't walk to all the places. So there's a skill in saying like, okay, well, we're here, but how can I tell you about like 7 different things with this one building.
Right. What trends, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Oh, yeah.
What are you seeing in today's contemporary world? We talked a little bit about gentrification.
Yeah,
which
all the things.
which there's a lot there. I got to get King Williams on the podcast to talk about that.
King's the one that's his tagline.
Yes.
History doesn't repeat itself. Sure does rhyme. All the things. I mean, even as if you want to get really, granular, the recent the Stop Cop City fight and the arrest of the protesters and now the RICO charges. I did an episode about Angelo Herndon and the Atlanta Six.
Yes.
When I tell you, it is exactly the same thing that we did to communist protesters in the 1930s, which was, again, very young, out-of-town communist protesters, which, not to go into a rabbit hole, but communism in the 30s was really labor organizers, so it was really labor organizing. Atlanta was like, oh, no, we are not doing this here, like putting them in jail, with no charges. And then, not to get even more morbid, but Angelo Herndon's biography talked about his time in the Fulton County Jail and the Atlanta jail, and he saw people die. And we have now had, 7 deaths come out. So from something as important and sad as that to then again, even like the World Cup, because if you look at the Brave story and the Falcon story, like we were the first city to do that franchise free, and I'm not a sports person, so I'm not gonna say the right words, right? But like we really politicize sports and use them as like a city booster thing. Yeah, we're the first city to do that. We were the first city that was like, we will build you a stadium, come.
Right.
And you can see where like we're just still doing the same things, even with soccer. So when I tell you pick a topic, I can tell you something that we did the exact same thing 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and that's part of my, let me tell you, right? Because let's do something different. Like, let's even something as simple as a night mayor. Like, they tried a night mayor in some random decade. I don't think anybody remembers because I think they recently tried to do something like that, right? Where they had
I've heard about that.
Yeah, that was not a new idea. Which again, a small thing, but it's like, guys, we've tried all this.
So you have a mayor that clocks in at 5.
It was supposed to be for working class people that couldn't go during the day. People who worked night shift. Yeah, the idea was that you had representation for people that couldn't take off during the day, which is actually a great concept, right? Like a lot of people don't have the privilege to stroll down to City Hall, during the day.
We always end the interview with why Atlanta and what has Atlanta done for you. And so this is an interesting one because I do feel like, I think we were talking earlier, Atlanta was fortunate enough to get you. Was it 18 years ago or after your time in New York City? But why Atlanta and what has it done for you?
What's funny is I know you ask this question at the end of every episode and I still wasn't ready. I was like, I had to think of an answer. So for me, it was kind of like a place that it was hard to get used to at first, especially as a New Yorker, right? Everything was like different and things were in my face, like religion and stuff that I wasn't used to. So I feel like I was like a begrudging Southerner for a while. So for me, like I credit Atlanta with changing the way I think about things and people and Southernness and the history that I thought I didn't like the war. Like it has just made me look at everything I ever learned in a different way. And I feel so adopted by it. Like I've been so welcomed as the outsider and never gotten like a harsh word about it. And so it's like, when I tell you this is home, like my parents retired down here, like my child was born here.
And that's amazing, right? Because you have a podcast that's 5 years old. It is one of the best podcasts about Atlanta. And, it's the fact that you've been welcomed like that.
Never,
that is
I'm
really
always
cool.
Truly, I am always waiting for the angry email. And I will say, like, I get people who are like, I grew up here and I had no idea, and so it has truly always been such a positive response. That's what keeps me going. I'm telling you, when I'm like churning out that episode on a Thursday night at like 11 p.m., I'm like, why do I do this? And then I get an email and it's like, thank you so much. I moved here and I didn't know anything. And I'm like, oh, this is why.
And I'm sure you've gotten to meet so many just wonderful people.
So many. So I have legit friends.
Dinner invites.
Oh, I have been to people's houses. I mean, my husband is so understanding and patient because I will literally, hey babe, I'm having dinner at the firehouse on Edgewood. And he's like, okay. And so like had dinner at the firehouse. The firemen there are my favorite. Invited people's apartments, invited people's houses. Again, dinner. Do you want to come walk with me? I've had people take me on walks through their neighborhood. I have made legitimate, real friends through the podcast. Like people that are my best friends today, I've met through the podcast. I answer all the emails I can. I have like 100 internet friends, I call them. Never met in real life, talk all the time on Instagram. And then one day they'll show up at an event. I'm like, oh my God, Tiffany, like so good to meet you. So it has just been the single best thing like I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending time on the Atlanta Story podcast. We loved learning more about why you do it, what you do. I mean, and that's the other thing. It's not like you're, the face of it, right? It takes, the Archive Atlanta. You got to kind of dig to be like, all right, so who's behind this?
Yeah, I know. I try to be a little bit in the back, try to shield myself from any criticism. It hasn't come yet, but yeah.
So Archive Atlanta, thank you so much for being on the Atlanta Story podcast.
Thanks for having me.
This podcast is brought to you by Atlanta Ventures. It was co-produced by JC Cadet and Jon Birdsong. If you are looking to start the next $300 million business in Atlanta, check out the studio at atlantaventures.com and the companies we work with who've done it before. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it at your next coffee meeting or dinner greeting, rate it, and write a benevolent, eloquent review.